Minecraft horror story, The Siren in the Ocean. Steve was 40 blocks below the surface when the bell began to ring. There was no bell in the ocean monument. Steve knew that because he had spent 3 days clearing every hole, breaking every dark prismarine wall, and drying the central rooms with sponges. He had found gold blocks, wet sponges, sea lanterns, and enough prismarine to fill 6 double chests. He had not found a bell. Yet the sound came again, deep and slow. One heavy strike rolled through the water and shook dust from the monument's ceiling. Steve stopped mining. His diamond pickaxe hung over a cracked prismarine block. Behind him, his friend Mara stood inside the small air pocket they had made with signs. She held a torch in one hand and a map in the other. "Did you hear that?" Steve asked. Mara stared at the dark water beyond the signs. It came from outside. The third strike was not a bell. It stretched into a long metal cry, like a village alarm heard from very far away. The note rose, broke into static, and ended in a voice. "Steve." The voice sounded exactly like Mara. Steve turned toward her. Mara had not moved her mouth. Every sea lantern in the monument went dark. For several seconds, the only light came from Mara's torch. Its orange glow touched the wet walls and the blue edge of Steve's diamond armor. Beyond the signs, the ocean became a solid black window. Then something passed in front of it. 2 thin legs moved through the water, each wider than a tree trunk, and so long that Steve saw only the middle parts. Brown skin clung to hard square bones. Strips of dark flesh waved behind them like banners. The legs did not swim. They walked along the sea floor, one slow step at a time. The monument shook when the second foot came down. Mara whispered, "What is that?" Steve placed a block over the opening. "We are leaving." They had entered through a tunnel that ran from the dried room to a glass dome on the roof. Steve climbed first, breaking the temporary dirt blocks above him while Mara followed. Water poured through each gap and pushed at their helmets. The ringing returned louder now. It came from every side at once. Halfway up, they heard Steve's own voice from below. "Mara, wait." I dropped the map. Mara froze. Steve looked down through the rushing water. "Keep climbing." That was not me. His copied voice called again. This time it sounded hurt. "Please, something has my leg." Mara climbed so quickly that she struck Steve's boots twice. They reached the glass dome and pulled themselves through the trapdoor. Moonlight shone through the ocean above. Their boat was a pale shape on the surface, but between them and it stood a figure that reached from the sea floor almost to the waves. It was taller than the monument. Its body was narrow, raw and dark red-brown. Ribs pushed out beneath stretched skin. Its arms hung past its knees, ending in huge hands with long fingers. Where a head should have been, a thin neck held 2 black sirens facing opposite ways. Wires and cords twisted around the metal horns like dead vines. One siren turned toward the dome. There were teeth inside it. The glass cracked. Steve opened the trapdoor to the monument and shoved Mara down just before the dome burst. Water slammed into them. A hand swept through the broken glass. 3 fingers scraped the roof and tore away sea lanterns as if they were snowblocks. Steve fell through the tunnel. His armor struck the walls, costing him 2 hearts. Mara landed beside him, and they fought the current until Steve sealed the passage with dark prismarine. The hand dragged across the other side. Blocks broke one after another. The mod notes said it stayed in forests, Mara gasped. Steve stared at the wall. This world does not care what the notes said. They ran deeper into the monument. The creature could destroy their wooden cabin on shore, but the monument walls were thick. Steve hoped the water would slow it. He hoped its height would keep it outside. Both hopes ended when a siren blared from inside the eastern hall. They found a wet footprint covering most of the floor. The water around it was red. Steve and Mara had not come to the monument alone. 4 players had sailed from their base that morning. Bryn, their redstone builder, had stayed on the beach to repair the dock. Cole, their farmer, had taken a second boat toward a small island to gather turtles' eggs. Neither answered when Steve used the voice chat crystal in his inventory. Static hissed from it. Then Bryn spoke. "Steve, come back to shore. Everything is fine." The message repeated with the same breath, the same pause, and the same soft click at the end. "That is a recording," Mara said. The copied Bryn continued. "Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine." Steve turned the crystal off. They reached the monument's treasure room and blocked both doors with gold. Steve opened an ender chest. Their emergency supplies were inside: potions, food, spare armor, a loyalty trident, rockets, and 2 elytra. He gave 1 elytra to Mara. "We cannot launch underwater," she said. "There is a ravine west of here. It opens into an underwater cave. We follow it inland and dig up." "And if that thing follows?" Steve took the trident. "Then we find out if it can fit through stone." A child began crying outside the treasure room. The sound came through the gold blocks. It was quiet at first, then rose into frightened sobs. Steve did not know any children in their world. The voice begged its mother to open the door. Mara stepped back. "It is trying different sounds." The crying stopped. A warning siren exploded through the room. Gold blocks jumped out of the doorway and struck the floor as items. A long finger entered through the gap, bending at too many joints. Steve threw his trident. Lightning could not form underground, but the weapon struck the finger and made the creature pull back. Steve recovered the trident. He and Mara broke through the rear wall and entered a flooded shaft. Guardians swam in the darkness below. They had returned, even though the monument had been cleared. Their single eyes did not turn toward Steve. Every Guardian faced the same direction, west, toward the moving shadow outside. The shadow bent down. Both sirens appeared beyond the wall. One played Bryn's voice, the other played the crying child. Beneath both sounds came a slow beat like a giant heart. The Guardians fired together. Dozens of beams crossed the water and struck the creature's chest. Its body flashed red. For 1 second, Steve believed the attack had hurt it. Then the sirens opened. The sound that came out was so powerful that the water turned white with bubbles. Guardians spun away and struck the walls. Prismarine cracked. Steve's view shook, his heart dropped, and every item frame in the nearby halls broke at once. Mara pulled him into the shaft. They descended while the monument came apart above them. At the bottom, Steve mined through the floor. Sand fell into a black ravine. He placed doors on the rock wall to make air pockets, then led Mara west. They moved from door to door, fighting drowned and avoiding magma blocks. Behind them, pieces of the monument fell into the ravine. The creature could not enter the narrow cut, but its arm could. Fingers reached down through the falling blocks and searched the water. One closed around a drowned and lifted it out. A second later, the copied voice of the drowned's wet growl joined the noises above. "It steals every sound," Mara said. Steve pointed to a mine shaft visible through the rock. "Then we stop making any." They entered the mine shaft and crouched. No running, no mining unless needed, no voice chat. They communicated by placing signs. Mara wrote, "IT found us after Cole left." Steve wrote, "Maybe it followed his boat." She shook her head and added, "Or he led it here." The thought stayed with Steve as they moved through the abandoned tunnels. Cole had found the monument 2 weeks earlier. He claimed he saw its sea lanterns from his boat, but the water above it was too deep to see anything. He had also insisted that they build the beach camp before entering. At the time, Steve had thought Cole was excited. Now he remembered Cole standing at the tree line on the first night, listening to a distant alarm that no one else could hear. They found Cole's shield beside a cave spider spawner. It was wet with ocean water. Mara raised her sword. A sign had been placed on the wall beyond it. The words were written in Cole's usual uneven style. "Do not follow my voice." Below the message was an arrow pointing into a narrow tunnel. They followed it. The tunnel ended at a small stone room. Cole sat in the corner without armor. His boat was somehow beside him, though there was no water route wide enough to bring it there. His face was turned to the wall. Steve placed a torch. Cole spoke without looking around. "Put it out." Mara broke the torch. In darkness, Cole told them what happened. He had reached the Turtle Island near sunset. The eggs were gone. In their place stood a row of jukeboxes, all buried halfway in the sand. Each played the same broken disc. Through the music, he heard Bryn call from beneath the island. Cole dug down and found a chamber made of logs. The wood was old and covered with signs. Most signs carried dates. Some were older than their server. The newest had Steve's name and that day's date. Then the island stood up. What Cole thought were dead trees were the legs of Siren Head. It had covered itself with sand, leaves, and logs, becoming part of the island while it waited. Cole escaped by boat, but the creature walked after him across the ocean floor. Every time he looked back, its sirens played sounds from their base. Chests opening, cows, pistons, Mara laughing, Steve placing blocks. Cole reached shore before it did. Bryn rang the village bell to warn him. Siren Head answered. "Where is Bryn?" Steve asked. Cole finally turned. His eyes were gone. 2 dark holes crossed his face, and thin black wires came out of his mouth. "Everything is fine," he said in Bryn's voice. Mara swung first. Her sword knocked Cole sideways. The wires pulled tight, running from his mouth into a crack in the ceiling. Cole rose like an armor stand lifted by a lead. His jaw opened, and a siren blast came from inside his chest. Steve threw the trident. Cole vanished in a burst of white particles, but the wires stayed. They snapped upward through the rock. Far above, something began to dig. Steve and Mara ran. Silence no longer mattered. The mineshaft roof broke behind them as long fingers tore through stone, wood, rails, and webs. Cave spiders poured from nests and climbed over the creature's hand. It crushed them against the wall. Their hisses joined the sirens. The 2 survivors reached a natural cave and launched with rockets. They flew over lava, twisting between dripstone columns. Steve heard Siren Head in every tunnel. Sometimes it used Cole's voice, sometimes Bryn's. Once it used Steve's own voice to shout that Mara had fallen. He did not look back until they reached a dead end. Mara was still there. The wall ahead was damp. Steve mined through and water rushed in. They had reached an underground river. Its current carried them beneath low stone until the tunnel widened. Glow squid lit the water. Axolotls hid among clay blocks. For the first time in an hour, the sirens faded. Mara surfaced inside a lush cave. "We should build a portal." Steve nodded. "The nether will cut the distance home." They found a lava pool, made obsidian, and lit the frame. Purple light filled the cave. Before entering, Steve checked his coordinates. Their main base was more than 2,000 blocks north. A nether tunnel could bring them home before dawn. The portal made a sound like glass humming. From far below, Siren Head copied it. Steve pushed Mara through and followed. They appeared in a crimson forest. Hoglins stamped between giant fungi, and red particles drifted through the hot air. There was no sign of their built tunnel. The new portal had formed in unknown land. Mara looked at the coordinates. "We need to go 250 blocks north." They began bridging over a lava lake. Steve expected the creature to remain in the overworld. Portals had size limits. Siren Head was too tall and too wide. The portal behind them stretched. Obsidian groaned. The frame grew upward 1 block at a time, then sideways. Purple light climbed toward the nether ceiling. A long arm pushed through. The creature folded itself as it entered. Its ribs bent inward. Its legs twisted around each other. Both sirens scraped the obsidian, sending black pieces into the lava. It did not walk through the portal. It poured through it. Mara fired a rocket. Steve followed. They flew over the lake while Siren Head unfolded behind them. Its first step sank through netherrack. Its second crushed a crimson tree. Hoglins fled in every direction. One siren played the portal hum. The other spoke in a calm village voice. "Players should not be here." Steve and Mara reached a basalt delta. Flying ash hid them, but magma cubes blocked the ground. They climbed a narrow pillar and dug into the ceiling. Siren Head moved below, almost invisible among the black columns. When it stopped, it looked like part of the landscape. Steve understood then why it had waited as an island. The creature did not simply chase. It learned the shape of a place and became that shape. In a forest, it was a dead tree. In the ocean, it was an island. Here, it was a basalt tower. Mara pointed at 3 identical pillars below. One of them had not been there before. Steve placed TNT in the tunnel behind them. They moved north, laying a redstone trail. When the fake pillar bent toward the ceiling, Steve triggered the charge. The blast opened a hole into the lava lake. Lava poured down over Siren Head's shoulders. Its skin caught fire. The sirens screamed, but beneath the screams, Steve heard many voices saying the same thing. "It burns. It burns. It burns." The creature climbed through the lava. They reached their main nether tunnel with only 6 rockets left. The tunnel was a safe ice road enclosed by stone bricks. Steve broke the entrance behind them and launched a boat onto the packed ice. They sped north. Their base portal was close. Mara watched behind while Steve steered. For a full minute, nothing followed. Then the lamps along the tunnel switched off one by one. Darkness raced toward them. A siren played the sound of a minecart. The noise grew faster. Steve looked back and saw Siren Head crawling on all fours, its body filling the tunnel. Its elbows broke through the walls. Its horns scraped the ceiling. It moved far faster on the ice than anything that size should move. Mara fired arrows. They struck its face, chest, and sirens without slowing it. The base portal appeared ahead. Steve struck the boat against the frame. He and Mara jumped through just as a hand closed around the obsidian. They entered the overworld inside their mountain base. Iron doors sealed the portal room. Redstone lamps glowed overhead. Chests lined the walls, and through a window, Steve saw dawn spreading over their farms. Bryn stood at the control panel. His armor was torn. Blood darkened one side of his face, but he was alive. "Break the portal," Steve shouted. Bryn pulled a lever. Pistons pushed stone into the frame, cutting the purple field. A hand appeared for half a second and vanished when the portal closed. The remaining obsidian cracked, but the room stayed quiet. Mara leaned against the wall. "Cole is dead." Bryn lowered his head. "I know." He had seen Siren Head take Cole at the beach. When Bryn rang the bell, the creature grabbed him too. It held him near one of its sirens while playing sounds from the base. Bryn survived by throwing an ender pearl through the open door of their storage hut. The wall blocked the creature's fingers long enough for him to reach the nether portal. "It is not hunting for food," Bryn said. "It is collecting us." Steve looked toward the farms. "Why?" Bryn opened his hand. A small piece of black wire lay on his palm, "So it can call the next person." They spent the morning preparing to leave. Their mountain base had taken months to build, but no wall could stop the creature. They filled shulker boxes with tools, food, ores, and potions. Bryn set TNT beneath the portal room. Mara brought the horses into the lower tunnel. At noon, the village bell rang outside. Their base stood hundreds of blocks from the nearest village. Steve looked through the farm window. Nothing moved among the wheat. The spruce forest beyond the wall was still. Mara drew her sword. Steve looked toward the sunflower fields. Their yellow heads had all turned away from the sun and toward the distant north. A thin line of salt water ran from the village well, though no river or sea was near it. Something tapped 3 times from inside the stone. Steve ordered everyone away from the square. The villagers did not obey. They stepped closer to the bell, shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall around him. Their faces remained calm. Bryn's voice came from every mouth again, softer now. "You brought it home." Outside, iron golems marched toward the well and stared down into it. None returned when they climbed over the stone rim. The bell rang again. A tall spruce at the edge of the forest turned one of its branches toward the mountain. Siren Head had returned without the portal. It had crossed 2,000 blocks before sunrise. Bryn triggered the TNT. The portal room collapsed, but the creature did not care. It came through the forest, snapping trees under its feet. Both sirens repeated the warning sound from a village raid. Pillagers appeared on the far ridge, drawn by the noise, then fled when they saw what was making it. Steve, Mara, and Bryn mounted their horses and entered the lower escape tunnel. The mountain shook. Dust fell. Behind them, storage chests broke and thousands of items spilled across the floor. They reached the tunnel exit in a river gorge. Bryn opened the hidden piston door. Sunlight poured in. The creature's hand punched through the mountain above them. Stone rained into the gorge. Mara's horse fell. Steve jumped down, cut the lead, and pulled her free. Bryn fired a crossbow loaded with a firework. The rocket burst inside the reaching hand, but the fingers kept moving. One wrapped around Bryn. Steve threw his trident. The strike loosened the grip for a moment. Bryn fell into the river, and Mara dragged him to shore. Siren Head tore open the mountain, revealing the rooms inside like a dollhouse split in half. Then it played a sound that stopped all three survivors. Cole screamed from the left siren. It was not a copied word. It was a long, living scream, followed by Cole begging them to help him. The voice said he was trapped inside the siren. It described the treasure room, the wet footprint, and the sign in the mine shaft. Things only Cole could know. Mara took a step toward the creature. Steve caught her arm. Cole died. What if part of him is still in there? Siren Head lowered itself. The left horn faced them. Deep behind the teeth, Steve saw a small blocky face pressed against the dark. Cole whispered, "Please." Bryn loaded another rocket. "That is how it collects us." He fired into the horn. The blast threw the creature's head back. Every stolen voice cried at once. Steve heard villagers, animals, players, and sounds that did not belong in Minecraft at all. Traffic, radio reports, air raid warnings, and people from other worlds. Siren Head struck Bryn with the back of its hand. He hit the gorge wall and vanished in white particles. His items scattered into the river. Steve had no time to collect them. He and Mara ran downstream. Their horses were gone. The base was open, and the creature followed along the gorge rim. It did not hurry. It knew they had nowhere safe to go. By nightfall, they reached the sea again. The coast was not the same beach. This shore was covered in ice, with bluebergs stretching into a frozen ocean. Steve found a ruined portal near the water and a buried chest containing an iron nugget, gold, and an enchanted golden apple. Mara looked across the ice. "It followed us out of the ocean. Maybe we make it go back." Steve understood her plan. The loyalty trident in his hand carried channeling. A thunderstorm was building over the sea. If they could draw the creature onto thin ice, explosives might drop it into a deep trench. Lightning would not kill it, but charged creepers and TNT might break its sirens. They worked through the night. Steve mined a grid beneath the ice and filled it with TNT from his shulker box. Mara placed boats as markers and built a redstone line to shore. Snow covered their work. Siren Head did not appear. Instead, Bryn called from behind an iceberg. "The blast did not kill me," his voice said. "I respawned at the old bed. I found you on the map." Mara started forward. Steve fired an arrow into the ice beside her boots. "Bryn's bed was destroyed when the mountain opened," he said. The voice behind the iceberg became a siren. The creature rose from the frozen ocean. Snow and ice fell from its shoulders. It had walked beneath the surface and hidden beside them for hours. Steve and Mara ran onto the trapped ice. Siren Head followed. Each step opened cracks. Its horns played Bryn's voice from one side and Cole's from the other, both asking why their friends had left them. Thunder rolled over the ocean. Steve reached the final marker and turned. Now. Mara pulled the lever. Nothing happened. The redstone line was dark. One section near shore had been removed. Siren Head had learned the trap. Its right hand came down between them. Steve rolled across the ice. Mara jumped the other way. The fingers closed on empty snow, but the impact started the TNT. A single block flashed beneath the surface. The chain exploded. Ice, water, and smoke filled the night. Steve fell into the ocean. His armor pulled him down through broken ice, while explosions continued above. He drank a water-breathing potion and searched for Mara. He saw Siren Head sinking beneath him. The creature's legs disappeared into a trench that cut through the sea floor. Its arms reached for the sides, breaking stone and gravel. One siren was bent, the other flashed with red light. Mara swam toward Steve from a cloud of bubbles. A thin black wire wrapped around her ankle. Steve dove and cut it with his sword. More wires came from the damaged siren, spreading through the water like fishing lines. Faces moved inside the horn. Cole, Bryn, villagers Steve had never met, all opened their mouths together. Stay. The water pushed outward. Mara struck the trench wall. Her helmet broke. Steve grabbed her and threw an ender pearl toward a shelf above. They teleported onto a ledge as Siren Head fell into the darkness below. The trench went almost to bedrock. Steve placed a door for air. Mara had half a heart left. He gave her the enchanted golden apple, then built a wall around the ledge. The golden apple saved her, but it did not heal the mark around her ankle. Where the black wire had touched her, a dark line circled her skin. It pulsed with the same slow beat Steve had heard inside the monument. Mara covered it with her boot. We do not have time to worry about that. They did not know whether the trench had another exit. Their ledge was trapped beneath 40 blocks of water and a ceiling of broken ice. Going upward would place them beside the creature. Going down meant entering darkness, where even a night vision potion showed only stone and drifting clouds. Steve opened his map. A tiny green mark blinked beneath the trench. There is a structure below us, he said. They descended along the wall, placing doors and soul torches. Near deep slate level, they found a square opening cut into the rock. It led to a stronghold hall, but this stronghold was flooded. Silverfish floated dead near the ceiling. Doors opened into rooms filled with kelp. In the library, books drifted between shelves like fish. Someone had lived there recently. A furnace was still warm. Bowls of mushroom stew sat on a table. A row of signs pointed toward the portal room. The first read, "Keep your voice low." The second read, "It hers through water." The third carried only one word. Too late. Mara's ankle pulsed. A note block played from the library's upper floor. Steve climbed the ladder and found an old player sitting behind a wall of wool. His name was Dorian. His armor was made from pieces of leather, iron, and turtle shell. He held a book but communicated by tapping note blocks with a stick. Steve placed a sign asking how long he had been there. Dorian wrote 186 days. He had once lived in a fishing town above the frozen sea. The town used bells to guide boats through snowstorms. One winter night, a new bell answered from beyond the ice. Fishermen followed it and never returned. A week later, the tall creature walked out of the ocean using their voices. Dorian and 6 others fled into the stronghold. Siren Head could not fit through the trench opening, but it lowered wires into cracks and spoke to them day and night. It promised food, it copied relatives, it used one survivor to call another away. Dorian was the last. He showed them a book filled with observations. Siren Head could imitate any sound it heard. Strong sound waves traveled farther through water, letting it hunt across great distances. It could remain still for days. Damage to its horns released trapped voices, but the voices were not truly alive. They were memories arranged to lure whoever listened. One page described the wires. The mark is a beacon. If it touches you, it can hear what you hear. Steve looked at Mara's boot. She backed away. Cut it out. Dorian shook his head. He drew a picture of a wire growing through a player's leg and reaching the heart. Removing it had killed 2 survivors. The only safe method was to make the signal follow a louder target. The end portal room stood below them. 11 eyes were already in place. Dorian had searched half the world for the final eye, but lost his supplies when Siren Head attacked. If they opened the portal, its constant sound might draw the mark out of Mara. It might also give the creature a path into the end. Steve checked his ender chest. He had blaze powder, but no pearl. Dorian knew of a drowned ruin where Endermen appeared each midnight on a small patch of warped nelium. The ruin lay in the trench, 20 blocks from the stronghold entrance. They waited until dark. Through a cracked window, Steve saw Siren Head climbing the trench wall. It had stopped falling. Its fingers drove into deep slate, pulling the huge body upward. One damaged horn dragged behind it. The other swept the water with beams of red light. At midnight, the creature became still. Steve and Dorian left through the stronghold gate. Mara remained behind because of the mark. The 2 players swam between stone columns and reached a drowned chapel. Warped blocks covered its floor. Purple particles appeared. 3 Endermen stood beneath the water without taking damage. Their jaws hung open. Instead of their usual cries, each made the sound of a distant foghorn. Dorian tapped Steve's shoulder and pointed upward. Wires ran from the Endermen's heads to Siren Head's damaged horn. It had placed them there as bait. The Endermen attacked before Steve looked at them. One teleported behind Dorian, another appeared inside the chapel doorway. Steve used a water bucket out of habit, but they did not fear the water. The wires controlled them. Steve struck the first. Dorian trapped the second in a boat. The third teleported above them and pulled Dorian toward an open crack. Siren Head's finger waited on the other side. Steve threw his loyalty trident through the wire. The weapon cut it, and the Enderman screamed in its real voice. It dropped a pearl when Dorian finished it. The damaged horn turned. "Thank you," it said in Mara's voice. The entire trap had been built to make them produce an eye. Siren Head reached for the pearl. Steve caught it first. He and Dorian swam for the gate while the creature tore open the drowned chapel. End stone warped nilium and old bricks spun through the trench. They reached the stronghold. Mara had already moved to the portal room. The mark on her ankle was spreading up her leg, branching like black redstone. She held a sword to her own chest. "I can hear what it hears," she said. "There are so many voices." Steve made the final eye and placed it. The portal opened with a deep roar. Black lines rose under Mara's skin. A wire pushed out through the mark and stretched toward the portal. Dorian caught it with iron tongs. Steve poured a strength potion over his hands and pulled. The wire resisted. Images filled Steve's mind. The monument, Cole's face, Bryn falling, the hidden island and forests from worlds he had never visited. He heard Siren Head copying emergency reports from ruined cities. He saw it standing beside roads, towers, power lines and playgrounds. Minecraft was only one of the places it hunted. Mara screamed. The wire came free. It struck the end portal and vanished into the black sky beyond. The mark faded from Mara's leg. For one relieved second, Steve thought the plan had worked. Then the Ender Dragon roared through the portal. The siren in the trench copied it. The stronghold ceiling split. Siren Head's arm punched into the library. Its good horn played the dragon's roar again. End stone began replacing deep slate around it. Chorus plants grew from cracks. Shulkers appeared on the walls and fired at anything that moved. "It can copy more than sounds now," Dorian said. "It is copying places." The portal had given it a new pattern. They could not leave it open. Steve broke the frame with a block of TNT, but reinforced blocks resisted the blast. Portal light remained. Dorian had another plan. The stronghold's silverfish spawners connected to old tunnels under the frame. If they collapsed those tunnels, the entire room would fall into the trench. Dorian led them into the lower cells. He had placed TNT there months ago. Steve connected the charges while Mara held off shulkers. Siren Head continued digging from above, copying the dragon until the water itself turned purple. They lit the fuse and ran. The stronghold floor fell away. The active end portal dropped into the trench and landed upright against Siren Head's chest. For an instant, half the creature entered the end while half remained in the ocean, its arms stretched between dimensions. Both sirens screamed different sounds. Dorian pulled a lever hidden behind wool. Pistons pushed the last loose frame block into lava. The portal closed. Siren Head's right arm vanished with it. The creature struck the trench wall hard enough to open a passage into a lava lake. Steam filled the water. Steve, Mara, and Dorian escaped through the old stronghold prison while boiling bubbles chased them. They surfaced in an underground ice cave. Dorian stopped near a ladder leading upward. "My town is above us," he said aloud. It was the first time Steve had heard his voice. It was rough from months of silence. The creature answered in the same rough voice. "My town is above us." Dorian climbed faster. They emerged among ruined houses buried in snow. Boats rested on rooftops. Bells hung from posts along the frozen harbor. Every building door stood open. The fishing town had waited exactly as Dorian left it. He entered the largest house and found 3 beds. A family picture map still hung on the wall. When Dorian touched it, one of the harbor bells rang. "No wind," Mara said. The other bells rang in order, moving from the far end of town toward the house. Dorian closed the shutters. "It knows I came home." Siren Head rose from a hole in the sea ice. It had lost an arm and one horn, but black wires had bound pieces of the stronghold and end stone to its body. A broken portal frame formed a hard shell over its chest. It dragged itself onto the harbor. The single remaining horn played Dorian's family eating dinner. He stepped outside before Steve could stop him. "They are not alive," Steve said. "I know." Dorian held a lever. "But this is my town." During his last winter there, he had filled the harbor supports with TNT. He had planned to destroy Siren Head if it returned. Fear kept him in the stronghold until Steve and Mara arrived. Now he handed Steve a map leading south. "You gave me one chance to hear my own voice again," Dorian said. "Use yours while it is still yours." Steve and Mara ran across the snow. Dorian walked toward the harbor bell. Siren Head lowered its horn and played the voice of a woman asking him to come home. Dorian pulled the lever. The frozen harbor exploded. Fire climbed through snow. Houses, bells, and boats fell into the sea. Siren Head vanished beneath broken ice. The shock wave threw Steve and Mara into a snowbank. They waited for Dorian's death message. None appeared. From beneath the ice came a weak note-block tune. It was the simple pattern Dorian had used to say goodbye. Then the last siren crushed it. Steve and Mara traveled south across a frozen river. At dawn, they found an outpost Dorian had marked. The chests held food, rockets, potions, and one written warning. If the ocean becomes quiet, do not believe it is gone. Behind them, the frozen sea was completely still. No bell rang, no stolen voice called, no footstep broke the ice. That silence frightened Steve more than the sirens had. For 3 days they stayed inside the outpost. Mara watched north. Steve repaired their armor and made firework rockets. On the 4th night, fish began falling from the sky. Cod, salmon, and tropical fish struck the snow around the tower. The ocean was being emptied. Steve flew high with his elytra. Beyond the horizon, the sea lifted like a wall. Water climbed hundreds of blocks into the air, held there by something beneath it. Inside the clear wall stood the shadow of Siren Head. The creature had placed its remaining hand under the ocean and was raising the water with it. The horn opened. It released every sound it had collected at once. The wall moved toward land. Steve dove to the outpost. He and Mara launched south as the ocean fell behind them. A wave crossed the ice, tore apart the fishing town, buried hills, and filled forests. Siren Head rode inside it, walking across the new seafloor. They could not outrun the water on foot. They flew until their rockets ran low, landed on a mountain, then built upward. The wave struck the mountain and climbed 50 blocks before stopping. Siren Head stood in the flood below. Its one horn pointed up. "Steve," it said in Dorian's voice, "use yours while it is still yours." Mara placed the last TNT around the peak. "We cannot keep running from every ocean." Steve looked at the creature's end stone chest and understood. It had survived the harbor because the broken portal shell protected its body. But the shell also carried the end's rules. Beds would explode against it as if they were inside that dimension. They had 5 beds. Steve glided down while Mara fired arrows at the horn. Siren Head reached up. Steve landed on the portal shell and placed the first bed. The explosion broke 3 end stone blocks. He placed the second before the creature could throw him. The blast opened its chest. Inside was not flesh. A hollow space held thousands of thin wires tied around glowing sound particles. Faces appeared among them. Steve placed the third bed. The creature staggered. Its stolen flood fell away from the mountain. Mara flew down with the 4th and 5th beds. They placed both inside the open chest and jumped. The double blast turned night into white light. Steve landed in water with one heart. Mara surfaced nearby. Pieces of the portal shell rained around them. Siren Head's legs remained standing for several seconds, then fell in opposite directions. The final horn floated on the flood. Cole's voice came from it. "You did it." Bryn's voice followed. "Break the horn." Dorian's voice said nothing. It played 3 quiet note-block sounds. Mara raised her sword. Steve stopped her. He had learned that the creature used correct information when it served the trap. They examined the horn from a distance. Black wires under it formed a line leading into the water. The horn was bait. Steve threw his trident. Lightning struck the floating metal. The horn split, revealing a bundle of TNT attached to a skulk sensor. If Mara had hit it nearby, the blast would have killed them both. The pieces sank. For a long time, they heard nothing. At dawn, Steve looked down. Siren Head was gone. For a long time, they heard nothing. At dawn, Steve looked down. Siren Head was gone. They climbed to the surface and crossed the ice on foot. Broken pieces of its left siren lay frozen among the blast holes. Steve collected one small metal plate. The item had no name. When he held it, his inventory filled with static. Mara threw it into a fire. Before leaving the coast, they searched the flood for any sign of Dorian. His map showed an emergency shelter beneath a hill south of the fishing town. The wave had opened its iron door. Inside were 9 beds and a wall of player names. Dorian had prepared the shelter for everyone in his town, but no one had reached it. A chest held written books from the missing fishermen. Each described hearing a different voice from the sea. One heard his father. One heard a lost child. One heard Steve, even though Steve had been thousands of blocks away and had never met him. The oldest book was dated years before Siren Head appeared. Its writer had seen 2 dark horns sticking above the water during a thunderstorm. He thought they belonged to a sunken ship. When lightning struck them, something under the sea said his name. Mara found a final page hidden beneath the chest. The ocean did not bring it here. Someone dropped it into the ocean. Beside the words was a map showing a red X on a deep-sea ruin farther north. Steve wanted to leave. The creature had lost its body, and the flood was draining. Nothing good could come from searching for its beginning. Then he remembered the horn's wires leading underwater. If any piece remained, it could rebuild. They sailed north in separate boats. At the marked coordinates, the ocean formed a perfect square of darkness. Night vision did not reveal the bottom. Steve dropped a torch. It fell until its light vanished. They descended with potions and found an ancient city buried under the sea floor. Skulk covered the buildings, water filled the streets. At the center stood a giant frame made of reinforced deep slate, wider than a nether portal and shaped like 2 open sirens. Black wire led into it. Mara touched a skulk sensor. Instead of clicking, it played an emergency broadcast. Warning, unknown object entering world. Another sensor continued. Impact expected in Northern Ocean. A third used a voice with no emotion. Do not answer the calls. The ancient builders had seen Siren Head fall into Minecraft. They built the frame to send it back, but the creature copied their warning signal and called them out of hiding. Their bones lay inside the wool rooms. At the base of the frame, Steve found the missing part of the final horn. It had traveled through the wire before the blast. Dark flesh was already growing around it. The small horn spoke in Dorian's voice. You found the door. Skulk shriekers activated throughout the city. Wardens rose from the flooded ground. They did not attack Steve or Mara. They faced the growing piece of Siren Head. Their sonic blasts struck together and pushed flesh from the metal. The horn answered with the same sonic blast. Water bent, buildings cracked, one warden fell, and its dying roar entered the horn. Steve placed TNT around the growing flesh. Mara studied the ancient frame. Redstone would not power it, but skulk vibrations did. Every blast charged one section. The builders needed a sound strong enough to open it, she said. Siren Head had destroyed them to prevent that sound. Steve led the wardens toward the frame by throwing snowballs at the horn. Their blasts lit the deepslate one block at a time. The growing creature lifted a thin arm and copied Mara, begging Steve to stop. He kept moving. The frame opened. There was no purple light. Inside lay a grey place filled with telephone poles, empty roads and forests made from shapes unlike blocks. Tall shadows moved between the trees. The horn tried to crawl away. Mara struck the TNT. The explosion threw it through the opening. Black wires pulled from the skulk and snapped into the grey world. The stolen voices called from the other side, becoming quieter as the frame closed. One voice remained after all others faded. Steve's voice whispered, "It knows the way back." The reinforced blocks went dark. Steve and Mara buried the city entrance under obsidian, sand, and lava. They could not destroy the frame, but they could make it hard to find. Before leaving, Steve wrote a warning on a book and sealed it in an ender chest. "If you hear your name from the ocean, do not answer." They traveled inland for 6 days. Neither used voice chat. They slept in different shelters and used written books to make plans. On the 7th day, they found a plains village surrounded by sunflowers. Iron golems guarded the paths. Farmers worked under the bright sky. There were no tall trees and no ocean for hundreds of blocks. Steve believed they had escaped. He built a stone house beside the blacksmith and placed Bryn's recovered crossbow above the door. Mara made a small memorial for Cole and Bryn. Life became simple again. They traded, planted crops, and repaired the village wall. Weeks passed. One morning, a fisherman arrived from a river settlement. He carried a strange item wrapped in leather. He said it had washed ashore after a storm, and he hoped Steve knew what it was. Inside the leather was the bent metal plate from the broken siren. Mara threw it into the blacksmith's lava. The plate sank without burning. That night, every villager left their bed at the same time. They walked to the center of the village and stood around the bell. None spoke, none moved. Steve pushed through them and reached for the bell. It rang before he touched it. The sound was deep and slow, the same sound he had heard inside the ocean monument. The villagers turned toward him. Every one of them spoke in Bryn's voice. "Everything is fine." The bell rang again. Far beneath the village, below the caves, below the lava, and below the lowest layer of bedrock, something enormous answered from the ocean.